lifestyle was just.
Can we start? Good morning. I feel better today. I'm back. Energy is back. A couple of things first. So I think I'm gonna I'll do admin first, right? Then we can discuss a couple of things, then we can look at what we are supposed to do today. It's not a lot of work today, but it's interesting stuff as always. It's very difficult to speak in front of people. Again, it's all a plan. I mean, if you don't believe me, go read through that. Make sure you properly understand risk and return. Because the questions you are going to get there are a bit rough. Makes sense. So you are going to get 2 attempts and you won't be able to see the solutions and we take the highest mark. Agree. So what you must do is go through risk and return. The starting point should be the chapters we gave you in the textbook, which is the chapters you did last year, and a couple of the questions you also have from Finance 2A. When I say last year, I refer to Finance 2A. So please go through that. If you do that, you should be fine for risk and return. So you can go and read the question or whatever on hashtag. Just to clarify, for those who don't do governance and control and all the other subjects, your focus should be on financial management, which is, I don't like scenarios. It's just this small thing here. Makes sense. Then there's a required here for financial management. So that's the required. So you'll see it's due between the 7th and the 9th. But what we will do, we'll open it way early for you so that you have enough time to do it. But it will close on the 9th at exactly 4 o'clock. Makes sense? 16:00. On my watch, not yours. So if yours says it's still 16:50, I don't care. Makes sense? When mine says 16:00, I close the assignment. So yeah, it will require you to go and practice risk and return. It's quite important because you will see a lot of what we're going to do is heavily related to risk and return and understanding the relationship between risk and return. Makes sense? So that's the first one. The second one we'll discuss later, but I'm going to upload 2 of them. So there's going to be challenge 3 and challenge 4. Challenge 4 will be based on unit 1 to 5. It's basically some form of a professional exam. It helps me because now I get to give you a revision. It's a lot of multiple choice questions. I think it's 40 that you have to do in 60 minutes. Even if you say, who has power? It doesn't help. So the questions that you're going to get in challenge 4 are basically multiple choice questions from unit 1 to unit 5. That will gauge your level of understanding and it will help you a lot when you practice for test 2 and the exam as well. Makes sense? Agree. So these are the 2 challenges you're going to get. Individual work. It's up to you how you want to do them. I know some of you'll pay your friends to do the questions for you. It's up to you, but at the end of the day, remember this is practice for the exam and the test. Makes sense? Awesome. The next thing we need to discuss, which is a document that's coming out today, because I've been trying to discuss with my colleagues how to do this, is class attendance. So class attendance will be implemented as you requested. You will be required to attend a minimum number of classes to get full marks. To get marks. To qualify for marks, there will be a minimum number of classes. Now, marks will be apportioned based on the number of classes you have attended. So if we say to you, so today, okay, one last thing. So next week, we are going to leverage and capital structures. It's straightforward. I think what we are going to do, I'm going to follow the same approach we followed last week, where I literally need to show you what we call a real life problem, a problem we face. So last week when we did weighted average of cost of capital, you realize weighted average cost of capital is an important tool in evaluating future capital projects. Makes sense. And you need to be careful of the relationship between risk and return when using that weighted average cost of capital. Now, last week's assumption was that capital structure, which is the mixture of debt and equity in your capital structure, doesn't really matter. Remember, we didn't even focus on it. We just said you have capital structure, this is debt, this is equity, or you have share capital, share premium, preference shares, and all those instruments, and calculate WACC. No one, or we didn't have a discussion around what percentage of my capital structure should be debt and what percentage should be equity. Makes sense? We assumed the percentage-wise doesn't matter. If you calculate WACC, you get a number, you use it to evaluate future capital projects, then you're sorted. So the question is, and which is something you should be asking yourself right now, is if I am to run a business, if I am to have a business, what percentage of my capital structure should be debt? Should it be on a 50-50 basis? Should it be 60-40, 20-80, 100% equity? What percentage? Now, that's what we are going to explore today. We're going to try and figure out capital structure. When looking at what we call capital structure, what percentage of our capital structure should be debt and what percentage should be equity? Debt, remember, I'm referring to all the debt instruments you have. That's debentures, bonds. If you probably classify redeemable preference shares as debt as well, if you want to do that, I'm referring to that. So do you think, or let me just put the question this way. Maybe last week I didn't explain. I had a friend when I was still in varsity, many years ago. I think it was before you guys were born. I had a friend. We used to argue a lot about the concept of finance. And I mean, for example, there was 1 year where he said to me, it's quite important, or that it's important that because the interest rates were very low, I should try and buy more assets. Like when interest rates are low, one should go and buy a house. That was his philosophy. And he said, no, man, I mean, it's cheap financing. Why not buy a house? In fact, I'll buy more houses. For me, it sounded like it makes sense, right? Because prices of assets, well, financing is cheap. Why not buy a house? Right? And that was what he said to me. And I said to him, well, it sounds like it makes sense, but I have a problem. Because I believe that how an asset performs is not affected by how it's financed. And he said, no ways. And I said to him, okay, let's take a practical example. And you guys, maybe you'd solve it for me. If I buy my car cash, maybe I prefer a Toyota Corolla. If I buy my Toyota Corolla cash and you buy yours on credit, which Corolla performs better? They all perform the same. You think so? Are you able to tell when someone is driving their car if they bought it for cash or on credit? No. So now we realize that the performance of an asset is not affected by how it's financed. That can't be. You can't tell me that by financing in a different way, you're going to alter the performance of an assets. Do you see the problem? Now, I told him this, and he was like, yeah, man, your model doesn't work. There must be a way. And I agree with him. There is a way. But guys, do you think that you and I can have the same assets and we fund them differently, and as a result of the funding model, my assets perform better than yours? Do you think it's possible that one can work on their funding model and as a result, it results in a business that's better than their friend's business. Do you think so? Do you think there is value in looking at this funding exercise? Okay, maybe if I put the numbers down. You guys are giving me answers to the things we are going to do. When we start doing them, you'll be shocked. Okay. So you guys are telling me, right? If I have a house, let me just say an asset, because if I say a house, if I have an asset that I bought for 100,000, you see what? Okay, there we go. And it returns 23%. So whether I finance this asset with debt or with equity, it will still return how much? That's what you are saying. Should I ask again? Okay. If I have an asset that gives me a return of 23%, the asset itself, without considering any finance model, the asset gives me a return of 23%. Whether I finance it with debt or equity, it will give me 23%. Do you think so? Let me repeat it. Different way. If I have a car that I drive every day to work, whether I finance it using my bank or pay for it cash, this car will drive the same way. Yes. Okay, so the asset will give 23. We all agree. The car has to drive the same way. Unless if maybe FNB or West Bank or whoever is financing your car puts in a table for you. I don't know. But the car drives the same way. This we agree. Right? So we are saying the asset will drive the same way. Now the big question is, now looking at funding model, am I able to have a better funding model than my friend to actually get more return out of this asset? Not necessarily the asset itself, but when I look at my funding model combined with the assets, when I look at my assets, liabilities, and equity, would it allow me, or is it possible that I work on my equity and liabilities to a point where I will get more return out of the asset than my friend? Yes. Do you know the concept of leverage? But you are saying no, you can't. Okay, let me do this. Okay, so if you finance this asset with 100% equity, as in you decide, I'm not going to go to the bank, I will put in 100,000 of my money, right? You will put in 100,000 of your money. Now, your return on equity, right? So if we were to do it, if this asset gives you 23% for the first year, you'll get 23,000. Your equity that you invest, that is how much? 100. Your return on equity will be what? 23%. Agree. Agree. This is you. This is you. Then comes your friend. Your friend decides, oh no, let me put in 50%, 50,000 of my money, right? And I'll go to my bank and get debt worth 50,000. So your friend now funds this asset using debt and equity. Now let's see. Bank charges your friend 14% interest, right? So it means on top of the 23,000 your friend is going to pay, your friend now must owes the bank how much? 14%, am I right? Your friend will owe the bank 14%. Why is it giving me 7,000. Agree. So it means in total, your friend. What's going on, guys? Why is this thing doing this? In total, your friend is going to make 16, right? And you would have made how much? Remember, you made what? 23. Your friend is going to make 16. You made 23 having invested what? 100,000. Your friend now makes 16 having invested what? 50,000. Let's see return on equity. Therefore, your friend's return on equity will be the 16 divided by 50. Agreed.
Do you see the whole
Yeah, it's like this. Bam.
It's like I'm a little bit on it.
Yeah. Bam.
What happened?
Mic drop.
Do you think that by changing the way we fund the asset, we made the asset to perform better? Awa? Did we alter the performance of the asset by changing the funding model? What did we alter? The return. We altered the structure, our funding structure, to maximize the return. We didn't change. The asset is still giving you what? We changed our funding model. This is called leverage. It's using someone else's money to make money off it, but make more money. If you look at it, the bank is once 14, but the bank's money is giving us 23. Do you see? The difference between the 14 and the 23 is what we pocket as extra return. This is what leverage does. Well, it's good when it's going up. You don't want to face leverage the other way. It's going up now, it makes sense, am I right? To leverage. But you can imagine this model is quite dangerous because the performance of an asset is not necessarily guaranteed. You know that, right? The asset could, instead, it could give you 14% here. If the asset decides, well, I'm now on 14, we are going to have a problem. Why? Well, 14, it's not a, let's take it to 10%. If the asset gives us 10%, your friend will generate 10% return, right? But you, because you are leveraged, now you have a problem. Do you see the problem? You're on 6%. So it works both upwards and downwards. You're on 6% because the bank still wants its 14%. Do you see? So this is what we call leverage. Leverage doesn't alter the performance of the assets, but it actually works on your funding model to create value for shareholders. That is why when we first taught you financial management, we said you have investing decisions and you have financing decisions. This is the financing aspect of things. Makes sense? But to what extent can you actually add on this debt? That's the question everyone would be asking. To what extent is it possible to have zero equity and 100,000 of debt in a capital structure? Is that even possible? Yes, no? Is it possible that you pick up a set of financial statements and there is zero equity and just debt? What's stopping that? Now I want to hear your thinking. What's stopping that? What's stopping ShopRite or Pick n Pay to just fund the whole business with debt and get rid of shareholders? Collateral, I hear collateral, so it means debt requires security. Okay, that's what you're saying. What's the other reason?
Just payments.
Guys, is it possible, yes or no? You are saying no, but you don't give me an answer. Okay. These are the questions we have to answer today. So one of the questions we have to answer when we look at the concept today is it possible to fund business with debt? Is it actually possible? To what extent should we work on this capital structure to create value for shareholders? Because we have already seen that to a certain extent, when we look at the model we looked at now, which I'm going to explain to you as well, when we look at the model we looked at now, altering capital structure creates additional value for shareholders, right? But we just don't know to what extent. Makes sense? That's what we need to find out. Is it interesting? Now whenever someone posts on Twitter that interest rates are low, go buy houses, you'll be sitting there on some. That's why you're a DJ. Buy assets based on the assets performance. Then we go and work out on our funding model. The funding model must suit your risk appetite. You see that? It's a risk you're willing to take. It has nothing to do with the asset must perform on its own before you fund it. Makes sense? Leverage cannot alter the performance of the asset, but the question is, can the performance of the asset alter? I'm assuming your question is, can the performance of the asset decide on the type of debt you're taking on? Is that what you're asking? Do you think the performance of an asset can decide on the type of debt you're taking on? Not necessarily here, not necessarily here. Why? Is there a reason why? Why can't I sit and say, this asset is very risky, I'm going to fund it through equity? Or this asset has less risk and I'm going to fund it through debt? Tell me. I'm here. So,
get muscles, niggas, and young. See,
what would you use?
Nigga pressing, running it down.
This guy is going here. Guys, question is, can
one's a hunter.
we agree that
What is it?
Fuck this chick.
so that you think about it. We agreed that the funding model can alter the performance of an asset. But can the performance of an asset alter the way you're going to fund it? 2 minutes to think about it. When I'm done blowing my nose, you must have an answer.
If the asset is on return of buy.
Okay, if this English is a bit confusing, don't think about it in English. Think about it in your mother tongue or whatever language you want. Can I decide to fund something differently because of how it performs? Performance, I mean, when we speak about performance, we speak about it scale. That's the performance of an asset. Can I decide, looking at that asset, that, hey, this one, hey, this one, I must buy it cash. This one, I can afford to have debt on it. Is it something you do? 2 minutes, think about it. Ask your friend next door. First, you must introduce yourself and then ask.
Chelo matale.
depends on the use of the funds. Do you guys agree? They are saying no, and I'm with them. The other one said no somewhere. Or you change your mind. Okay, let's just discuss it. And I think it's a good question. So we said the higher the risk. So if an asset is risky, you will require the return you are requiring. It's the cost of capital. Am I right? So definitely it means the performance of an asset can alter your funding model. I mean, think about it. If you perceive you want to acquire an asset and you perceive it to be risky, right? You perceive it to be risky. Others are of the opinion that for risky projects, I rather go and get debt because it won't be my problem. I'm funding it with debtors, the bank's money. It could be something you do. You'd say, hey, it's risky. Maybe I must call my friend from the bank to fund this type of a business. And the security for the business must be that particular business. Because I know the business itself is risky. If the bank doesn't calculate the same risk appetite as me, then I'll be sorted because they will fund the business. But from my perspective, I just want the rewards. But I'm not funding it. I'm the one who will take the profit at the end. The bank is the one taking the ultimate risk anyway. Do you see that? Or sometimes the bank can say, I'm not funding this, it's too risky. And you'd be forced to use your own money. So definitely, the performance of an asset, to a certain extent, can have an impact on the type of funding you're bringing. Am I right? But not the other way around. Agree? You see it now. Thank you, Makai. Can we start? Okay. So now we are starting. Because now we're having a discussion and it's nice. You wish we could have these discussions every day, man.
Maybe the subject change really out.
Now we
Cost effective and serious stuff.
That bitch is just skinny and boring.
You see this? Really out.
Is it possible to fund a business just from debt? Okay, I got this question in the second group last week. One lady came to me and said, hey, Chief, I can fund my business with debt. Now, her explanation was simple. She's going to go to the bank, borrow money, and put it into the business. What do we call that? It's called equity. Do you know that? Still remember accounting high school? John went and borrowed 5,000 from the bank and put it in the business. What is that? Equity. It's capital which is equity. It can't be debt. It becomes debt if the debt is in the name of the business. Makes sense? So what you're asking me, is it possible for the business to be funded 100% with debt? I've been trying. If it's possible, guys, you must tell me the model. Because I can't see it. First of all, you'll face a challenge. Banks want security. And unfortunately, if you are to buy a house, one day when you start working, you're going to realize a certain thing. Because I always have finance discussions with my friends. And finance is a problem. Because a lot of people think that if I buy a house, the security for the house is the house itself. And it's actually a lie. It's not the house only. It's the house plus your bloody salary. The bank, because if the security was the house only, it means you would be able to walk in and say, fund me. No salary, fund me. So the security is the house and so the bank wants an extra cushion. So when you start working, you're going to hear of the term loan to book value. So banks work on loan to market value or loan to book value. So what they would say is they are willing to, if they see that your salary is not enough and you're too risky, they would say, no, we are willing to fund you, but we are only funding 80% of the purchase price. right? So it means the other 20%, they want something called a deposit. Why do they want a deposit? Because they realize your salary alone is not enough. You are a problem. They face a risk of actually having to sell off the property because you are unable to pay. You see that? And if they sell it off, if you buy a house for 700,000, doesn't mean that if the bank sells it, it will get 700,000.
They will sell it for less.
It's going to get way below 700,000 at auction. Makes sense? Do you see the challenge? So I don't think it's possible to start a business with it. At tendering, yes. That you can start. But a proper business that's taking on, because tendering there is no risk. The risk is that you might not get the tender. If you got the tender, there is no risk. Do you see that? And in any case, if you got the tender, you've already calculated proper profit. It's not even, there is no variation, there is no risk involved. I mean, if they want me to bring 20 cases of pencils, I'm bringing 20. Macro sells them at 1,000, I'm going to sell them to the municipality at 3,000. Where is the risk? Zero. You see? So tendering is not a business. When I say business, I'm not referring to tendering because it's something else. Now, did I answer your question? Okay, let's continue. Now let's start. So the purpose of today is to explain this capital structure story. So they start off by explaining what they call financial leverage, which is what we did, where it shows a capital structure that has no debt, right? And a capital structure that has debt. Then it shows you that what would happen if there is a recession and or things go as expected, or there is an expansion or a boom in the economy. So remember, in my previous example, the capital structure with debt outperformed the one without debt. Still remember the story of the 32% and the 23%. This is basically what they're showing. So if you look at this, it says capital structure with no debt. If there is an expansion, you get an 18.735%. They do it the same way as I did it. Whereas if you have debt and there is an expansion, you get 27.5. Do you see that? The level of debt here, I think, was on a 50-50 basis. You see it's 50-50. Debt 50%, equity 50%. The same way I did it. Makes sense? Then they show you that, but however, if things go south and there is a recession, the capital structure with no debt would return on equity of 6.25, whereas capital structure with debt would give you 2.5. The reason is because debt providers still want their 400,000 rand of interest regardless of whether the asset performs or not. They don't care about the performance of the asset. They want their return, which is interest. Makes sense? So this is the start of showing you what I showed you now, which is the concept of leverage. They call it financial leverage. Makes sense? To what extent can we do this? That's the questions the question that you guys still have. To what extent can we do this? When does it stop? Can I do 100%? So all these calculations are just showing you the importance of leverage. You're going to have a nice time going through this. Now we start. Now that you understand that leverage to a certain extent is important in creating shareholder value, where does this calculation, or when did this discussion start? The first thing you're going to experience, which you're going to take out a piece of paper and a pen to write a few notes if you want, but if you don't want, it's fine as well. So the starting point was a discussion, or the discussion was what we call M&M propositions. Now, M&M, you don't have to know the name, but M&M propositions are, the discussion started long ago, in my time around 1958, when I was still a student. The discussion was, is debt relevant for shareholder value? That was the question. Is debt relevant for shareholder value? Now, M&M proposition states that the value of the, this one I would like to call it M&M proposition 1, right? So this is a proposition 1, and others normally label it without taxes. So they write proposition 1, and they say the model doesn't include taxes. So M&M, Modigliani and Miller, they did this. You'll see it's quite important when those who are going to write CFA still there, because it helps you grasp this concept of debt. Modigliani and Miller did this, and they said, well, the proposition 1, what they call the pi model, or the model without taxes, states that the value of the firm is independent of the firm's capital structure. So that's their proposition, that's their suggestion. Their suggestion is that value of firm, right, can be altered by your capital structure decision. And this proposition had a problem. This one, or this proposition 1 without taxes, had a problem. The problem was that it had what we call ideal world assumptions. They were assuming an ideal world. Makes sense? What is this ideal world? You want to Google it. You can Google it, you'll see their assumptions. Modigliani and Miller ideal world assumptions. The ideal world they were assuming is that there is no taxes, which means no one pays taxes in the ideal world. They had. Individuals and companies can borrow at the same rate. So it means you and I, my friend, you and I can borrow at the same rate. And that we know you and I can borrow at the same rate. Who's risky here? See? So they assume that there is no asymmetry of information. You and I know the same things. Do you think you and I know the same things? No, you don't know what's in the chest. So definitely this proposition they submitted, which is, I would like to call it proposition 1 without taxes, because later we are going to do the same proposition but we change it. So proposition 1 without taxes said, if the world was ideal, definitely how you fund an asset wouldn't create more value for shareholders. So they call it a pi model. They said whether you use 60-40 or 60% debt, 40% equity, or 60% equity, 40% debt, the size of the pie will remain the same. And it makes sense. Whether you fund it with debt or equity with debt, the asset will perform the same way. Agree? Yeah. Should perform the same way. Because there are no taxes. There is nothing. No taxes, no asymmetry of information. A lot of things they assume to relax. And the world was not ideal. I mean, the world we live in, we pay taxes. You don't, but I do. Your time will come. It's very painful. The world we live in, individuals and companies can borrow at the same rate. So this model of theirs assumed a whole lot of things that we don't live in today, right? But if you assume that, you start seeing how I finance an asset definitely won't affect its performance. Makes sense? That's proposition 1 without taxes, or the pi model. They then, in the same ideal world, went and created what they call Modigliani and Miller proposition 2. In this ideal world, they said, if you think that when you bring on debt, because debt is cheaper than equity, you are going to create value for shareholders, you are going to have a problem. What is the problem? The problem is the fact that the cost of equity, what your shareholders require as a return, is a function of the return you get out of an asset, the cost of debt, and your capital structure. Did you hear that? You're not supposed to hear that. So, the cost of equity. What is the cost of equity? It's is the return required by equity providers. I'm not referring to the cost of capital, which is a combination of debt and equity. The cost of equity. The return required by your capital providers is a function of the risk you get out of the asset itself, right? Plus the risk you get out of leveraging, which is financial risk. So ideally, it's a function of business risk and financial risk. So what they are saying is that if you bring on debt, right, your shareholders will require a higher return. So for example, if a company that doesn't have debt, what you face in it, we call it business risk, right? But a company that has debt, it has a combination of business and financial risk for a shareholder. Logic. Now let's dump away this fancy English. Now, last week I explained this again to you, and I said that if you have an asset or you have a business that has no debt, and a similar business that has debt, which one is riskier? You have two businesses, they do exactly the same thing, they generate, the assets themselves generate the same return. One has debt, one doesn't have debt. Which one is risky? The one with debt. Do you know what you did there? You applied proposition 2 of Modigliani and Miller. You said both of them have the same business risk. But this one has an additional risk. That additional risk, we call it financial risk, because there is debt in there. Do you see that? So Modigliani and Miller said, oh no, if you think by taking on debt, you are giving an advantage to shareholders, which is what we did here. So they said, if you think by doing this 50,000 debt and 50,000 equity, you are actually giving an advantage to shareholders. You are wasting your time, because what you are doing, guys, you didn't tell me you can't see. You see now. Now I look like an idiot. Where is it? So if you think by doing this, you are actually creating an additional return for shareholders, you are wasting time, because your shareholders are going to increase the return they require. They will no longer require 23. Now they will say, no, I require 35 because there is a lot of risk. The higher the risk, the higher the required return. So that increase in the required return will outweigh the benefit of this cheap debt you're bringing in. And ultimately, you are not creating any value for your shareholders. You are at the same spot. This is in the ideal world. Is it making sense though? How are you saying you are benefiting shareholders by giving them more risk? You're not. That more risk you're bringing will be, or the benefits of that more risk you're bringing will be outweighed by the increase in the required return. Your work calculation will remain the same in the ideal world. Instead of, if we are to do it, if you are to calculate work, you'd have a work of 15%, then you take on more debt and your work will be 15% again. Because there is no taxes, everyone thinks the same way, and all that ideal world principles. Makes sense? Remember, all this is happening in the ideal world. So they say to you, states that, so M&M proposition 2, without taxes, that's where in the ideal world, it says, a firm's cost of equity capital is a positive linear function of the firm's capital structure. What's a linear function? It means when capital structure goes up, the cost of equity will go up. If cost of equity goes up, even if there is a benefit, the lower that your capital, what your capital structure brings in, or what the cost of capital brings in as a cheaper rate, it will be equal to the increase in the cost of equity. Work will remain the same. That's what they assumed. Do you see that? Don't forget this. Now we go to the next thing. So ultimately, what they assumed in Modigliani and Miller in this ideal world, they said, well, in the ideal world, no matter how much debt you bring in, when you take on debt, you are just increasing what? Cost of equity, because you are increasing risk. When you bring on cheap debt, you are increasing cost of equity. Ultimately, work will remain the same. If I give you this diagram in the test, you must know it's Modigliani and Miller proposition 2 without taxes. You see that? But you can read the diagram and see work remains the same. The only principle that I know that says work remains the same, it's the ideal world principle of Miller and Modigliani. It can't be proposition 1 because proposition 1 is 2 pies. Remember, it has to be proposition 2. Happy? Okay. Now, so ultimately proposition 2, that's what I said. It says the cost of equity is a function of what? Business risk, which is the risk underlying the assets, the performance of the asset. So the operation itself could be risky or less risky, plus financial risk, which means that the business that has debt is more riskier than the one that doesn't, if both businesses are the same. Makes sense? Remember, this is to a shareholder. Or cost of equity, not cost of capital. Please be careful. Cost of equity and cost of capital are 2 different things. Cost of capital, the word capital in corporate finance refers to debt and equity. Makes sense. But in high school, when they said capital, you said money to start a business, which was fine. Okay. So we know that, now we understand. Then it happened that these calculations we are going to look at here, you can just do them at your own time. But it happened later that after criticisms around proposition 1 and 2 without taxes, Modigliani and Miller decided, no, this ideal world thing doesn't work. Maybe we need to change it and bring everything to the world we live in. Makes sense? The world we live in, they decided to relax and say, well, we are going to do the same propositions, but we are going to take taxes into account. The other ones we still leave as is, but we assume that it's a world where there are taxes. Makes sense? Where people pay taxes and companies pay taxes. Right? Then, what would happen to the 2 propositions? What they saw is that in proposition 1, with taxes, you see it says taxes and M&M proposition 1. The other one was without taxes because it was an ideal. This one says taxes and M&M proposition 1. They said, in a world where the people pay taxes and companies pay taxes, definitely by altering your capital structure, you are able to create additional value for your shareholders. And that additional value is what they call a present value of the interest tax shield. The fact that interest is tax deductible will create an additional benefit for shareholders. How does that work? Let's just say the fact that interest, you can see they actually go along and prove it, but I don't want to prove it because that's not the aim. The aim in the test is just for you to explain it. How it works is basically to say, in a world where there are taxes, or where we pay taxes, definitely you can alter capital structure, or you can create more value for shareholders by altering your capital structure. And the difference will be present value of interest tax shield. Memorize the words. How does it work? So ultimately, Miller and Modigliani proposition 1 with taxes. So what you should see, proposition 1 always refers to the value of a company. Proposition 2s refer to cost of equity. So remember the previous proposition 1 was saying the value of the company is irrelevant for, let's just look at it. I just want to show you something so that when you start, you don't forget. If you look at this one, states that value of a firm is independent of a firm's capital structure. Firm is company, by the way, not audit firm. Value of a firm is independent of the firm's capital structure. Happy. Value of firm. Do you see? It means when I repeat the same proposition, one must still refer to the value of the firm. If we look at proposition 1 with taxes, what does it say? What did I say? What did I say it said? Okay, the value of a firm can be influenced by capital structure decisions. To extent that the value of a levered firm, which is the value of a firm that has debt, right, will be equals to, if we're looking at two identical businesses, the one that has debt and the other one doesn't have debt, would say the value of the one that has debt will be equals to the value of the one without debt plus what? Present value of interest tax shield. It makes sense because the only different thing is that in this equation, the present value of tax shield matter. Makes sense? Yes. Are you sure? So both propositions you see, it still refers to value. Here, a levered firm is equals to unlevered firm plus the tax shield. Whereas when we looked at without taxes, it would say VL is equals to VU only. Because whether you bring on debt, there is no added benefit. But this side, the added benefit is that VL is greater than VU by TC times D. This TC times D is the present value of the interest tax shield. Makes sense? We are moving on. If you draw it on a line, it basically says, if there is no debt, if you look at it this way, this is the level of debt. If your debt is 0, value of levered and unlevered will be the same because both of them won't have debt, right? But once you take on debt, we expect the firm that has debt to be more, the value of the firm that has debt to be more than the one that doesn't have debt in this proposition with taxes. Agree? So you'll see it continues and continues and continues. Whereas the one that doesn't have debt will have the same value, right? Because it doesn't have debt, unlevered, right? The difference between these two businesses is the present value of interest tax shield, the difference between the two values. Now, what it assumes is that the more debt you take, the more value you create. You see that? It assumes that the more debt you take, the more value you create, which means the optimal, the best capital structure, what we call an optimal capital structure. The optimal capital structure is a point where debt is at what percent? 100. Am I right? That's what this proposition assumes. It assumes if I put on 100% debt, the value of this present value, or the present value of my interest tax shield will be maximized. Agreed. But do you think it's possible to put on 100% debt? We saw it. You said it. No, it's not going to be possible. So you can't put on 100% debt. Makes sense. Now, if you look at it the other way, it's this way, where it says to you that by taking on debt, you will lower your weighted average cost of capital, right? And you will keep lowering it and lowering it and lowering it the more you take debt. Remember, when you lower weighted average cost of capital, the assumption is that you are increasing value for shareholders. Makes sense? Do you agree? Or do you want me to prove it to you? Okay. Lower work, more value. So by lowering and lowering and lowering, you are creating more value, which means optimal capital structure will be 100% debt. That's proposition 1 with taxes. Proposition 2 still remains the same. Where is it? Proposition 2 still remains the same. They have it here, except previously we said RE is equals to RU plus RU minus RD times D over E. Stopped here. You still remember? Because we said it's a function of the cost of equity is a function of business risk and financial risk. You still remember? Now it's business risk, financial risk, but it gets lowered by the present value or 1 minus the tax rate. So it means taxes play a role in decreasing your cost of equity. So the difference between a levered and unlevered film in Modigliani and Miller's proposition 2 without taxes is purely the fact that taxes get, what's going on here? What's going on? Lost. It's almost August, you can't be lost. People are completing their studies, you are lost. So it's 1 minus the tax rate. Makes sense? So the difference would be 1 minus the tax rate. All happy? We are about to do the register now. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten. So the question is it possible to fund a business with 100% debt? The answer is no. Because if you try and fund a business with 100% debt, you are going to experience financial distress. Have you heard of financial distress? Yes. Guys, have you heard of financial distress?
Yes.
Have you heard of liquidation?
Yes.
Yes? Have you heard of business rescue? Yes? So if you try, what happens normally when businesses are going under business rescue, where all of a sudden now the liabilities are more than assets. Right? If liabilities are equals to assets or more than assets, then you are experiencing, well, it starts with liabilities being close to assets or equals to assets. You are unable to pay your debt now, then you're going to experience financial distress. Right? Financial distress creates problems. And the problems you get with finance, let me just sip my water. So the problems you get with financial distress is you're going to incur what you call direct and indirect costs. I'll give you practical examples, some of the stuff that you have seen on TV. Normally when there's financial distress and people are going under business rescue, they hire practitioners and all those things. These business practitioners come at a cost, and they are quite expensive. Now, normally when financial distress happens, you'll see the challenge becomes that a business, when it's going under or experiencing financial distress and ultimately business rescue, it's normally the debtors trying to protect themselves. Because shareholders, they are in or out, all or nothing, right? Whereas debt providers are looking at getting their money back. Agree? So what normally happens in these business rescues and when people start to fight is because banks will go and approach a court and say, hey, this comrade won't be able to pay me. Now I want to take him into business rescue. Or I want to liquidate, right? So that I get my money back, right? Because I'm protecting the value of the assets. Normally banks would say, I'm trying to protect the value of the asset because that's the only thing that's securing me. Right? If shareholders waste this asset anymore or any longer, then I'll lose everything. Whereas shareholders are saying, well, I can rescue this business myself. I can turn it around. Have you heard of turnaround strategies? Where you hear, I'm sure you have seen with state-owned entities, there's always turnaround strategy in parliament. Turnaround. Have you heard of turnaround strategies? So shareholders are more on, I will turn this around, don't liquidate it, and stuff like that. So there is always a fight at the end, and that fight results in direct and indirect, what we call direct and indirect bankruptcy cost, or financial, others would say it's financial distress cost. So it results in a lot of financial distress. And it's always a fight. I'm sure you have seen it where the other one, there was an insurance business that belongs to a union that has been put under business rescue by the Prudential Authority. And then the guy went on TV to fight the business practitioner, because the practitioner now takes all the accounts and everything and he controls the cash. And now all of a sudden you have a business but you can't do anything in it because someone else is running it and they are trying to close it off. And the consequences is no one wants to do business with a company that is facing the prospect of liquidation. So for example, if you are told that your favorite car dealership or your favorite car manufacturer is going to be liquidated, you probably won't buy the car because you are worried they might not honor their warranty and service plan. You see the challenges. So people try and shy away. So there are a lot of financial, indirect, what they call indirect financial distress or indirect bankruptcy costs when a business goes into financial distress. So that is why it's not possible to fund a business 100% with debt. Because now you are entering a territory where indirectly people are going to perceive you as a risk, including customers who say, I'm no more buying debt. What if I buy, imagine I sell expensive furniture, then you buy couches for 50,000 and then I get liquidated tomorrow. That means I won't deliver. You see. So these things are quite important when you have to think about the funding model as well. So this is the reason that businesses are not funded 100% with debt. Makes sense? Now we change it. We say we have direct and indirect bankruptcy costs. I explained both, so you guys can go and read. You'll see it's exactly what I was explaining. And it happens in real life, where there is a fight. Now, with that in mind, we know that theory that tells us that you can fund business 100% through debt to maximize shareholder value doesn't work, right? So it doesn't work because you run the risk of financial distress, which is either indirect or direct bankruptcy cost. So the only thing that works, or the starting point, would be to look at what they call a static theory on capital structure. What does it tell you? The static theory on capital structure, it assumes that there is what we call an optimal capital structure. What's optimal capital structure? Is capital structure that maximizes shareholder value. Static theory tells us there is an optimal capital structure, but the optimal capital structure depends on the trade-off between two things. So it works on a trade-off model. It depends on the trade-off between taxes and financial distress. Remember, Modigliani and Miller assumed that taxes matter, and they said optimal capital structure is 100% debt. But this static theory says there must be a trade-off between taxes and financial distress, right? Which is those direct and indirect bankruptcy costs. So you must trade off. So it says to you, the optimal capital structure, the best capital structure, right? It will be at the point where firm value is maximized, right? Because what happens is, as you take on more debt, right? As you take on more debt, you probably experience an increase in firm value. Why are you experiencing an increase in firm value? It's because there is a present value of the interest tax shield, right? Because interest is tax deductible. Makes sense? You'll probably experience an increase in firm value, which is this pink line here. It goes up, up, up. You still remember the old Millian Modigliani, the straight one. It will go up, up, but at one point it will stop going up because now you are entering into the territory of financial distress, right? At this point where it stops going up, that will be your optimal capital structure. Then all of a sudden, if you keep on taking on more debt, shareholder value decreases because now you're experiencing financial distress. So the benefit you get out of the interest tax shield is less than the financial distress the cost of financial distress that you're experiencing. Then all of a sudden, firm value drops again. So your optimal capital structure is somewhere at this point, where firm value is maximized. Makes sense. What is this point? I don't know. Is there an answer? No one has an answer. So ultimately, the whole class I've been telling you about optimal capital structure, there is no answer. No one knows whether it should be 60-40, 40-60, 20-80. No one knows. But we know that too much will kill you. Too little, you also lose out. Makes sense? The other way to look at it is to look at it from where these two diagrams tell you the same thing, or these two graphs tell you the same thing. The other one says optimal capital structure is where work is at its minimum. Because if work is at its minimum, it means field value is at its highest. Ultimately, the assets still perform the same way. So that's basically it. You'll see they put both of them together. This is what we call a static theory. Don't forget it. It's a static theory on capital structure. It has nothing to do with M&M. M&M did proposition 1 and 2, both with and without taxes. From M&M never spoke about financial distress. It's the static theory that told us about financial distress. Makes sense? So it's a trade-off. So it's a trade-off model. You hear others saying it's a trade-off model. You can go and read about it. Then there's going on and explain about the extended pie model, which is the model that you see now, to say we often think that people who have a claim in business is dead.